Thank you so much for coming to our panel discussion. I think this is our fifth year doing this, and it's really become, at least for us at CSU, one of the highlights of the festival, when we get to bring filmmakers in and talk to them in this kind of interactive and relatively informal way. Though you can see by their thought balloons, their name and I know, isn't that clever? The name and the film that they worked on. I think the best thing for me to do is let's go down the line and everybody introduce themselves and just give us a little bit about your film and what brings you here to Cleveland. So starting with Jim Stark.
I'm here with a film called The Pier, which is a small Irish movie that played yesterday at 4 something, and then is playing tonight at 9:30. It's a second film by a director named Gerard Hurley, who directs it, produces it, stars in it, does everything basically in the movie. And I help get the money for it, and I produce small movies mostly with well, now these days with European directors, but I used to do it with American directors. And I was born in Cleveland and grew up in Cleveland, but I live in New York now. And I'm happy to come back to Cleveland and Cleveland State and the film festival, and especially be here for my mother's 88th birthday. And she's here.
Hi, my name's Sheldon Larry, and I'm here with a film called Leave It on the Floor. I've been directing for 30-something years. I spent 8 years at the BBC in London. I then directed theater off-Broadway in New York, and I've been living in Los Angeles for about the last 12 or 15 years. I also teach at the University of Southern California in the film school. I'm here with a film called Leave It on the Floor, as I said it, which is an original narrative musical set in the ball community of Los Angeles. If you know a documentary called Paris is Burning, that was the film that put the idea of this film into my head 20 years ago. And I've taken 7 years to put the script together, find an extraordinary composer, find the money to make it, used 50 of my students working on it. The film's had a lovely success. We've been in almost 60 festivals in the 8 months, I guess, we've been out, and we're arranging distribution. And it's a musical, as I said, set in the ball community, which features original choreography and 11 original songs.
Great.
I'm Eric Kissack. I directed a movie called Misconnections, which is sort of a kind of small romantic comedy about a guy who tricks women on the internet into having sex with him. It's hilarious. It's my first feature. I'm working as an editor in Los Angeles for the last few years, mostly working on comedies, and been looking for something to direct for a while, and this sort of came my way. Great script written by a very talented young man named Kenny Stevenson, who's right there, and so this is actually our first film festival. And
all right.
It's been amazing. There must be something in the water in Cleveland because you guys are so great. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Hules. I was born in Hungary, lived in Paris, New York, and now I live in Los Angeles. I started out in theater, directed the National Theater in Hungary, La Mama, New York, Los Angeles Theater Center, pretty much everywhere. I taught acting, writing, and directing, including at USC, NYU, the Paris Conservatory, and everywhere else. And then I moved to LA to basically make films, and I worked as a script doctor and an actor, and while I was working up to get to direct, which eventually happened, and I'm here with a film called The Maiden Dance to Death, which is a Canadian-European co-production, dealing with the aftermath of the Berlin Wall coming down through the story of a dance company, a Hungarian folk dance company, obviously including the staging of a dance piece called The Maiden Dance to Death. And we have screenings this afternoon at 3 something and tomorrow afternoon at 3 something.
Hi, I'm Genevieve Bailey. I'm from Melbourne in Australia, which takes 22 hours to get here from, if anyone's interested in visiting. It's a great place. I was born there, and my film is I Am 11. It's a feature-length documentary about personal and global issues through the eyes of 11-year-old kids around the world. So I started making it late 2005. I set off with a video camera. I laugh when I think back that I didn't actually do any research testing out whether 11-year-olds were as interesting as I thought they were going to be. I just got on a plane to Tokyo, and 6 years later we're here in Cleveland with Henrik Nordstrom, my partner in crime, who produced the film with me. And yeah, this is our international premiere here at Cleveland. It's great to be here. Everyone's super nice, and it's nice to be back in festival land watching so many films and meeting great filmmakers. We had our world premiere at the Melbourne International Film Festival last year, and we won Best Documentary of 2011 in Australia at the CIFF Awards, which was pretty nice for an indie doco with no budget and no funding. So we're excited about touring the film in many more countries than we've actually shot it in 15, so hoping to screen in many more places.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, and make sure that you get out and see the films. For sure. Okay, let's start at the beginning, which is with ideas. There's a million ideas. We all have a million ideas. How do you know which one is going to be worth spending a year of your life, or 5 years of your life, or 20 years of your life, as the case may be on? Because once you commit to that, it's a long, hard road. So how do you know which ideas are the ones to go with? And why don't we start with Sheldon? Because he had the longest.
I've got seniority on ideas.
Yeah.
I think that I got my training at the BBC, and their credo is to inform and educate and entertain. And so I think that in this case, I saw this film as a musical. When I saw the documentary, I was so mesmerized by this world. If you don't know the film, you should go and look at it. It's still out there. And just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And this world was extraordinary. The ball community is a group in about 15 cities in the United States. They're runaways and throwaway kids, 90% of them African American, and whose families reject them, and they come into this group and they reform families and stage these competitive balls. We're screening tonight at 8 o'clock, so I can encourage you to come. But I think I'm a gay man, and I have raised twin daughters who are now 19. So the idea of families and reconfiguring families have always been something that has sort of resonated for me. And I think, as I say, these groups actually kind of create kids. And so that began it, I've always been interested in putting sort of marginal people in society into the center. And it is such a long and involved process of making a film. 7 years since I started working on the script with my writer. 3 years since I tried to start figuring out money. 2 years or 1.5 years since I started shooting. So there has to be something that is so passionate about the story that you want to tell that will make you go through the personal and financial indignities of making a film. So I think that's it. It resonates here and expands from there, and the great joy then is coming to festivals and seeing it resonate with people in your audience.
Genevieve, you also had a nice long run on this. What made you think 11-year-olds? That was the idea.
Yeah, I think I was writing an article for the Australian Writers Guild recently, and even though we've been working on these projects for so long, I think sometimes when you stop and sit, you think of new reasons or ideas in terms of why things happened the way they did. And for me, I reflected upon the fact that I came up with a feeling that I wanted audiences to experience. So I didn't know what I wanted to make the film about, I just knew how I wanted to make an audience feel and how I wanted to feel. So I had seen Spellbound, a documentary you guys would be familiar with probably, at the Melbourne International Film Festival, and I'd been through a really hard time. I'd been in a serious car accident and couldn't go to the movies very much, which was horrible because I couldn't sit or stand for longer than 20 minutes at a time, and just feeling pretty horrible. And my dad passed away, and I just was having a time where I wanted to inject some happiness into my life. So I thought, what would make me happy and excited? And I love shooting, and I love giving myself challenges, but I'd never been outside of Australia. So I came up with this idea to travel around the world with the Around the World ticket and make myself shoot in every country I went to. So I wouldn't be allowed to leave until I'd shot something interesting. Because I didn't like the idea of just hanging out with backpackers or people my own age or hanging out on the beach. I wanted to just kind of get in amongst it and experience life with families and whatnot. So I reflected on this age of being 11, and it was like my happiest time in life. I thought, I wonder if 11 is still this beautiful cusp where you're full of ideas and personality and opinions, but you're not yet at that kind of teen angst phase. And I joke saying I still haven't gone through that teen angst phase, so I hope it doesn't hit me now. But I just kind of thought, well, I remember seeing lots of great docs, and I kind of thought I want to make a feature-length documentary. My background was in more short fiction, and I love script writing, but I thought, no, I'm going to just go out there and see what I can find. And I got back after 3 months travelling, and I thought, yeah, I've got enough to finish it. And then I thought, well, I don't really want to finish it without having been to somewhere in the east of Europe. And then I was like, I can't finish this without going to China. And then I was like, I really want to go to India. So every year, the thing is with a film like this is there's 11-year-olds everywhere. There's no reason to not go anywhere other than the fact that I was, raising little bits of money in my piggy bank, and then Henrik got involved with the project. So we just realised, well, we finish it and make it little, or do we invest everything we have, time, money, energy, and make it as big as we can make it? So we decided on the second option, and I think it was resonating even just with the rushes. I met Henrik when I was in Prague 2 weeks into making the film, and he saw some of the rushes and he wouldn't even let me fast forward bits, and I was like, okay, this is interesting to someone other than me. And then every time I travelled with it, people were like, oh, they were interested. So I realised, okay, there is an audience for this, and let's keep going. So I think in terms of the story, I was enjoying shooting it so much and meeting all these kids that I always felt there was going to be an audience, and I always knew that we could get it to where we wanted to be, and just took a really long time.
Jim, as a producer, what is it in a script like The Pier that attracts you and that says you're going to devote a good chunk of your life to making this, to selling it? What are you looking for in terms of ideas? What are you looking for in terms of script material?
It's got to be something that I can understand. I don't tend to do political movies very much. This is a simple, dramatic story. It's a kind of universal story, a father-son story that could take place anywhere, but he tells the story with the details of the particular culture, in this case, Ireland. And that tends to be the kind of script that I get attracted to. But I have to say that as a producer who works with writer-directors a lot of it depends on the person, on the writer-director. So in this case, Gerard was somebody who was very, very committed. It was clear that, if I could get some money for him, that he would do whatever was necessary to get this movie made and try and do the best job he could at it. And he was, collaborative. Not all directors or writer-directors are collaborative with producers. So he was the right person. The project had some appeal to me, and so I pursued it. I mean, I've had other projects where the idea was mine, where I wrote the script with the director, I initiated the project. That was not the case here, but I did it, having some faith in Gerard, and in the end, I was very happy with the result.
For those ones that you helped generate, what was it about the idea that excited you? Can you kind of talk about that just a little bit?
I can give an example. I was invited with a film I had produced, a film called Mystery Train, to
one of my favorite films.
To Iceland for the Reykjavik Film Festival, and the airport is about 40 minutes outside of Reykjavik, and you go through this amazing landscape, lava fields and stuff, and most of the films I've worked on have been road movies in one way or another, and I had never seen a road movie set in Iceland. There hadn't been a movie at that point from Iceland that had been internationally distributed to any extent. So I decided I was in love with this landscape, and I wanted to make a road movie there. Mystery Train has a section in Japanese with these two Japanese actors, and I'd kind of fall in love with this guy who's in the first section of Mr. J. Masayoshi Nagase, who's now a big star in Japan, and I wanted to make another movie with him, and somehow the idea of a Japanese guy coming to Iceland and wandering around in the landscape lost, I thought was hysterically funny. So I met, these Icelandic directors, and Fredrik Fredriksson, again, was somebody I liked, and he and I developed a project, and it has, things that I liked about Iceland, things that were important to me, and things about finding yourself in a journey that, resonated with me. And I'm working on a number of scripts now with people, and they're just stories that I think, to me, it's about the story. It's about, I think that movies are the modern equivalent of sitting around a campfire and telling a story. So it's the kind of story that's going to keep people engaged and on the edge of their seat, and at the end of it feel, this was worth my time, and I learned something, I've been transformed. And that's the kind of story that appeals to me and can motivate me to go through, 3, 4, 5, 6 years of working on one of these projects.
Andre, what is it that excites you in looking for story ideas?
I may say something sacrilegious, just kick me out. But,
Please do. No, we need it. It's still early for me.
Right. Well, there are two things that make me want to make a movie. One of them is if it moves me, if something moves in my stomach. And I don't know what it is, but it's just something that doesn't let me rest. And these are the works of love. And these are movies that I want to make because I want to see them in a movie theater, and it just doesn't let me rest. The other kind of movie that I want to make is that they pay me for.
There's nothing sacrilegious about it.
All right, good. I have 3 kids. I'm not independently rich, so while I'm making my works of love, which nobody wants to pay me for, I have to survive. And the creation of this film that I just brought here is actually a very telling story of how this dichotomy works. I was visiting my son, who was studying in Hungary at the time, as I was preparing for a fully financed film called Demons. It had the financing, it had the star attached, we had a schedule set up, everything was ready, and I was just sort of working out the details. And my son asked me for a script, if he could read it. And I gave it to him, and he left it on his desk, and one of his classmates came by and said, "What is this?" And he said, "This is my father's script." And he said, "Oh, really? We are filmmakers too. We need somebody to write us a script. Can he write it for us?" And my son said just the right thing. He said, "You can't afford him." He said, "Oh, really?" So I have this meeting with these young Turks who are very well placed in the Hungarian government, and they ask me if I can write them a script, and I give them a number, and they said, "Okay, sure, no problem." Next day, I get a phone call from Los Angeles. The film fell through. The financier in Hong Kong went bankrupt. In turnaround. We'll be working on it. The film never got made. So they call me back. Would you like to write the script? Sure, we write a contract. I go back to Los Angeles, write the script. 3 months later, the Hungarian government changes. These guys are out of favor, no money. So then the question is, what do I do? Do I try to sue them and get nothing in return? Or do I try to salvage the operation somehow? And so I offered them a deal, which was, give me back my script. You didn't pay for it, give me a paper that it's mine, which they did. And then I sat down with a script that I had written to somebody else. And I said, what interests in this script? What am I interested in this script? And reworked the story, reworked the whole content of it to the specifications of what I was interested in this story, and started over with the financing, and that's how the film got made. It's about over a 10-year period. But there is a dichotomy, not just for me, but for the film as well, is how do you finance the film? How do you finance yourself? How does this piece get made practically?
We're Berkeley.
All right. So
You were saying?
Neil, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
That's an incredible story, and the fact that it took a decade to get your film made, from salvaging it from a for-hire screenplay is really quite amazing. Eric, can you tell us where the idea came from for Misconnections?
I think my answer is going to be even more sacrilegious. Because I just wanted to make a movie. I'd never made a movie before, and I kind of had this idea that I could probably spend a long time looking for, the perfect thing, and I don't know, it maybe just never come along or whatever. And so I basically was just open. I was like, kind of told everyone I knew. I was like, bring me something. I want to make something. And I got really incredibly lucky because I met Kenny and Dorian, and they had the script that was like, really charming and funny, and just, was exactly the kind of movie that I love and kind of wanted to make.
What about the movie was it that attracted you? What about their script attracted you to that?
It was this perfect combination of just charming and funny, and the humor was very, it was kind of a little bit raw and a little bit kind of wrong, but also really sweet, and just kind of, reminded me of the movies that I love to watch. But I mean, really, when you get down to it, it was like, oh, you guys want to make a movie with me? Let's make a movie. And I had this idea that if I kind of, if I just sort of got a bunch of funny people together who, were smart and funny and talented, and created a sort of a set where people could be at ease and sort of and funny, that like people would actually enjoy being on set, and they would that their enthusiasm and their sort of enjoyment would carry through to the screen. I think that's what happened, which was very exciting. So it wasn't so much the idea of the story or anything, but more just sort of this idea of like, let's make a movie that's just all kind of get together and see what happens.
So it was the hey gang, let's put on a show?
Pretty much. Pretty much.
Right on.
Yeah.
Neil, could you tell us a little bit about your film, about how you got started on it, about where the idea came from?
I made a documentary called Beauty's Embarrassing, and it's about a guy named Wayne White. And Wayne is everything. He's a puppeteer, he's an artist, painter, a banjo player, set decorator, art designer. He made Pee-wee's Playhouse, he made Beekman's World, made a lot of commercials in the 90s and music videos. Smashing Pumpkins, Tonight, Peter Gabriel's Big Time. And so I met Wayne about 10 years ago. I was actually interning at a company, and he was drawing Priceline commercials. And I was fascinated by him because my age, and anyone close to my age, has been touched by things he's done. Throughout my whole experience in pop culture, he was always there, whether I knew it was him or not. And so I became fascinated with him. And I was in Hollywood just bouncing around, digging ditches like everybody out there. And I always knew there was a story and something very interesting about him. I always knew I wanted to do it. And I was actually really worried that someone else would come along and do it ahead of me. And finally I had the means, and he and I were sitting having pizza one day, and I said, hey, we should make a movie about you. And he said, no, that's really boring. No one wants to see that. And I knew he was engaging and magnetic, and I knew he was a good story, and I said, no, we got to do it. And like 3 pizza lunches later, his ego got to him. And he finally said, hey, about that idea, we should do that. So I bought a $600 Canon Vixia camcorder and started following Wayne around, and did that for about a year by myself. And shot in Chattanooga, and Miami, and LA, and Nashville, and New York, and all over the place. And then a year later, I hired a guy named Chris Bradley, and then me and Chris shot. And when Chris came on, we got a light. We had a light for a year, and we used that light occasionally. But it was just 2 guys, and Chris edited the movie, and it was really a passion thing that people got on board with, but as small as you can get.
And footage from your $600 Sony camera is in your finished film?
About 80% of my movie is that little camera. The other camera was a Sony EX1, and the rest of the footage is either TV shows, clips, or high-8 footage that Wayne shot in the 80s. Wayne's kept everything he's ever done, everything he's ever touched. He's got in his little 12 by 12 studio. And I went over there one day, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I've got this box of tapes." And I said, "Oh, great, I'll take a look." And it was about 100 hours of footage at home, footage, jobs he had done, and behind the scenes at Pee Wee's Playhouse that no one had ever seen. He had never even seen it. He would shoot and put it away and then leave it there to collect dust. And that's kind of when I knew we had a special movie. So.
That's fantastic. And y'all feel free to converse among yourselves, because that's one of the things I think that's fun about the panels, not just kind of talking to the audience, but talking with one another. And maybe this will get us there a little bit, because I wanted to jump into the challenges of production. It's like you have this idea, you work on it, you work on scripts, you develop it, all of that. For you, what is the kind of biggest challenge of production? And why don't we start with Sheldon, since he hasn't gotten a chance to speak in a few minutes.
I think it's all about keeping your eyes on the prize. It's all about moving it forward as gracefully as you can through a situation. I mean, I've made, I think, like 25 films, but Leave It on the Floor is a musical. It's an original narrative musical with 11 songs. The songs are by Beyonce's music director, Kim Burse. Choreography is Frank Gatson, who's Beyonce's choreographer. He's done all of her videos. And the particular challenge of this film was that, again, there are so many moving parts, and so between casting cast who can sing and act and dance, putting together a crew that wasn't going to bankrupt me, and finding producers with Kim who could help us put the music together. But I think when your head's in the right place. In some senses, this has been the most sort of graceful film that I've ever been involved with. But I think as a director, it's knowing what you want, what you can live with, what you can and can't afford, and how do you prioritize. And I talk to my students sometimes too about, and again, as I said, 50 of them are on the crew. They're all on deferred contracts. So if they ever see a penny, they'll make some money. But it was also an in the trenches class, in a sense, being on set with them. And really to evaluate at every step, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And you've got to become fleet-footed and penny pinching. So if you've got an idea, what's really parsing the idea? And so literally it was that. It's at some point, it really is making a film is the Fitzcarraldo image of schlepping the boat over the Andes. That's what you got. And I think it's such a resonant image in terms of every part of it. In terms of how you'll do it, who can do it, how you can get it done on the time. It doesn't matter if it's an indie film with shot on a small camera with no budget or something bigger. You've got to take what you've got and move it forward. So that was it. Just at every turn, being open, being grateful to the fact that people were showing up. It's sort of, if you build it, they will come, and I think that's the encouraging thing for filmmakers. And it's been, even with this film, it's been joyful because we've had such wonderful success, both festival-wise and critically and audience-wise, and also now beginning to be distribution, is that with the new technology, you can do it. You can do it. There's no excuse now not to make a film. So just keep moving forward.
So Eric, you just wanted to put on the show.
Yeah.
Did you run into any kind of unexpected challenges, or how did your process work once you moved into shooting?
The biggest challenge every day was time. I'm working as an editor for a number of years, and so I was, pretty much every day I would come to set with my shot list and every day I would get far less than I wanted because we ran out of time. And I sort of, I think the first day I showed up on set with like a shot list of 35 different setups, and we wound up getting like 15, And then by the second week, I was like, I had 25 setups, and we wound up getting 15. And like, by the end of it, I sort of,
15 setups.
by the end of it, I figured out that 15 was probably about what we could get. But yeah, it was just time. As an editor, I wanted just as many options as like possible. I was greedy for setups and angles and options, sure. And especially for comedy. I mean, the more you can move around, the more kind of you can determine the pacing through editing, the better chances you are of creating a funny scene. And so I just, I got to the point where I was like, if we got a good take in one angle, I'd be like, move on, get another angle. But that was a big challenge. Time every day we ran out of time, and every day I felt, guilty about asking, can you stay 10 minutes later, please?
I understand. Yeah. Jim, you've done movies of varying budget levels. Are there challenges that are greater at a higher budget level, and are there freedoms that you find at a lower budget level, or is it just the more money you have, the better it is?
Yeah, I guess if I thought that, I'd be making Hollywood movies. I think the advantages of making low or no budget movies are that they're at least theoretically easier and faster to finance. You've got less cooks, in the kitchen. And what I find is that there are a couple of advantages of doing very low budget movies. One is that if the atmosphere and the culture is people aren't really getting paid, nobody's getting paid. You can't do a no budget movie and show up, in a chauffeured Mercedes, and eat caviar yourself and then not feed anybody else. But if everybody, the producer, the director, the actors, are all on the same level with the crew, then everybody feels like they're in it together. And so the atmosphere is better. I mean, we did a film for $50,000 in New York that had, dozens of locations and gunfights and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it was as hard a shoot as you could do, done in about 3 6-day weeks, so 18 shooting days. And the people had such a good time doing it. And we made a deal. It was like, I don't know, $1,000 or a couple $1,000 we paid each crew member for the whole shoot. And they had such a good time that for like a month or two afterwards, they would meet every weekend in a bar because they missed each other. And that doesn't happen on a union production. So that's one advantage. The other advantage is that if you know that if there's a scene that you want to get or an interaction you want to get, and you have very limited time and money to get it, it makes you sit down and say, how can I get this in the most efficient way? I mean, we were talking about yesterday Strangers in Paradise, which is a film that was done at a very low budget, and the first part of the movie, as we talked about, was done in 3 days because you could rent the equipment on a Friday and use it for the weekend. And the only way you could make the movie in that 3 days, 40-minute short movie, was to have a single setup, a locked-off camera, and a continuous long take. So that became the aesthetic of the movie. The story was all told that way in a very interesting and efficient and artistic way, but it was in large part dictated by the fact that the budget created limitations on the amount of time that you could shoot. And you can't have big crowd scenes, so you're limited to a certain limited number of locations, limited number of actors. Well, how can you tell the story you want to tell with those limitations? If you have a big budget, you're thinking, okay, I want my wide shot with the wonderful lighting and all the production design, and then I go to a 2-shot, and then I go to the close-up, and then I come back out again. Well, you can't do that. You're limited in the number of setups you can do. So how can you tell that same story in a limited number of setups, limited number of locations, limited number of people? So it forces you to become more creative and more artistic.
So lower budget kind of gives you the impetus for greater creativity. creativity, which I could definitely see. I'd like to change up just a little bit, Andre, and maybe talk about the challenge of collaboration that generally, and then we'll talk about what happens when you only have one person or two people. But you have done things where you've had larger crews, and what is the greatest challenge of collaboration with crew members and, with dealing with a larger crew?
Well, there are many different kind of challenges. The basic challenge is how do you make the crew follow you? And of course, when I started out, I figured that the way to do that is to tell them exactly what to do, which is one way to do it. But the results are not that good. And gradually I learned to create an atmosphere where I don't have to be ashamed of asking their advice. And I don't feel like I'm losing power if I say to the cinematographer, what do you think about this shot? Or I let the actor change a line, or get everybody to do their best work, and then try to integrate it into the vision that I want to create. So that's one challenge of how do you make a crew work together, how do you make the crew serve the project the best, and how do you keep control at the same time? So, because at the same time you have to be able to say to the actor, no, don't change this line because that's going to be detrimental to the rest of the film, or yes, that's a good idea, but not today. The other challenge is really how to I had the other problem that I worked with international crews. So this last film was made in 3 different countries, 4 if you count the United States. And they all have a completely different culture, and not even counting the languages, because often I was sitting in rooms where I was the only person who spoke all the languages spoken in the room, and had to translate not just the words that they were saying, but also what they really meant. Just to give you an example, when the Canadians and the Europeans first met, the Canadians came in and say, "Hey, how are you doing? It's nice to meet you. We are going to do a great film together, don't you think so?" And the Europeans came in and said, "Okay, we're going to do a serious work here. Let's talk." And they look at the Canadians who come in and flashy and happy and friendly, and say, "What are they trying to pull over us?" And the Canadians look at them and say, "They don't like us, do they?" And the situation just got more and more amplified. The Canadians tried to be even more friendly, and the Hungarians pulled even more back. And so by the end of the thing, it looked like we had no cooperation whatsoever. And it went through the entire production, and you have to sort of mediate. So you sort of the crew psychologist at the same time as you are directing or producing the film.
That's wonderful. Genevieve and Neil, you both have very small crews, is my understanding.
Yeah.
Is there ever a time when you felt like you either want to be where you needed more people, or did you feel that the smaller crew helped your project?
Yeah, well, I think for I'm 11, like I said, I set off with a camera and just a whole lot of hope and faith, and I was the writer, director, cinematographer, producer, and ended up editing the film myself, so wearing many hats. And I think there was loads of cultural challenges, shooting in 12 different languages when I only speak English and some Japanese. There was technical challenges, there was all these different challenges that I encountered, and I can honestly say that I actually enjoyed all of them except for the financial ones. I think it's hard to make financial problems fun. Cultural problems is fun. Overcoming different barriers, even lots of personal injuries and in health ailments. There's always a funny story to tell. Financial problems are usually not that exciting, but I think that Henrik and I were just super passionate about this project and managed to overcome them, and what we lacked in money we made up for in manners and congeniality. And I think that was a big part of getting this film finished, was that I had great mentors in Australia, but also people I met through making the film who just had faith in us and liked us as people. And like Jim was saying, I think a lot of it's got to do with whether people want to work with people. And if you're a pain and if you're rude, sure, there are people who are at a certain level and are still going to get a lot of work. But I think that ultimately all those challenges, I remember meeting someone who said to me, "What's your challenge at the moment?" She just was really pragmatic about it. She said, "Work out what you need right now. What's the problem? Okay, right, so you need to speak to a lawyer. And what's your next problem? Okay, so you need to get a good accountant on board." So rather than me thinking, "Whoa, we're at this point where this is overwhelming," I just did little steps, and I'm still doing that now. If we have something we need to work out, we speak to someone and we keep on moving little steps. So that would be my advice, as opposed to stepping back and going, "I want to make my first feature, this is going to be really hard." It is going to be really hard, but if you're not excited about it, your crew aren't going to be, whether it's a big crew or a small crew. I think if the director and producer are getting over it and sick of it early on, then I think the future is a bit grim. So for me, I'm not sick of this project still. I've seen it so many times. You guys should come and see it. It's really good. I'm not sick of it yet. It's playing tonight at 7 p.m, which is on standby, so maybe come early. I'm not sure exactly how the standby thing works. And it's playing tomorrow at 2. But for me, just knowing that we had an audience out there, and we have im11.com, the website, which is growing as we travel with the film. We're inviting 11-year-olds from lots of different countries to submit their own content. So if you know any 11-year-olds, get them involved. So for me, knowing that that audience was out there meant that we just kept on jumping those hurdles because we felt like it was worth it.
Also, for just point of information, most of the people who go and buy standby tickets do get in. It's very rare that they don't get in.
Great.
So just because it's on standby doesn't mean you should not go. Neil, when you added that second crew member, did your degree of difficulty double?
Mine was, I think being by myself helped a lot. And if you, on the way to her movie at 4:30, come see my movie. I think it was a good thing because a lot of the shots I have, most of the interviews, a lot of the stuff in Wayne's art studio is me and him. And he eventually forgot the camera was there. And he was great because he would do whatever I asked. Like if I asked him he made an LBJ head and danced in the hills. He put and not because I asked him, but he would he put overalls on and dance in his backyard. He would do anything for the movie. And there's a great scene that really shows that he forgot the camera was there. What he does is he buys vintage landscape paintings and he paints words and scenes into them. Just pithy, sarcastic phrases. And he's standing there looking through this book of phrases he has, and he says, "Just leave the awards on the kitchen table. I'm back here painting a fucking masterpiece." And then he looks at me and says, "That's funny." And he can tell that he's not answering a question. He's not performing. He's looking at me and saying, "Don't you think that's funny?" And it's and the audience gets to think, "Yes, I think that's funny." And they get to react with him and for him. So I think it lended itself to a lot of intimacy that really helped the movie. But the problem I had with my movie, because it's my first time doing this and was doing it by myself, I had to it was an emotional issue. I had to really learn trust myself that what I was doing was good and what I was capturing was good, and trusting the process, because I did put it in Chris's hands to edit, and I had to really trust that this is how we should do it, and then trusting that my audience knew enough to get what I was trying to do and would like what I was doing. So just gaining a lot of trust was a big deal for me, just to know that this was good and they would like it and we should keep going forward, and you should come in and do this with me. And that was a big deal for me.
I would just add as well, exactly on that intimacy level, I was making a film about 11-year-old kids, and I was really conscious from the start that if you walk into a kid's house with a guy or a girl with a boom pole over their head and someone lighting their kitchen and fixing up their bedroom, and I was thinking back when I was 11, I wouldn't have been comfortable with that. So for me, my first priority was my 3 rules. They had to be 11, they had to want to be in it, and a parent or guardian had to give permission. But I was always conscious that they had to be comfortable. And in Morocco, it took me a really long time to find someone. I went out to a very rural Berber village, and this girl jumped out from behind a bush, and she found me and gave me 3 kisses, and she was 11. So I was like, great, let's go. But I had a heavily pregnant translator with me who I'd met from the place I was staying, and it was her old village. And immediately, once I turned up, I was really heavily dressed like like in a headscarf and a lot of clothing. It was really, really hot, and I had my gear. So as I was, miking up Siham to start the interview, every man and his donkey literally came out and either stood behind the camera yelling at her what to say, like actually yelling, say this, say that, tell her your dad's poor, tell her that we're from a poor village, tell her we don't have electricity. Or they stood in front of the camera and just stood next to her with their donkey and just went, just staring down the barrel. And I was like, this is awkward. But then it actually took me 3 years, believe it or not, to find. I was doing other things during that time, but it took me 3 years to find someone who spoke her dialect to then get it translated. So in Australia, I went everywhere, like translation services. No one spoke that dialect, but I was really hell-bent on making sure that Siham ended up in the film because I went through such a challenge to find her. But when I got the transcripts back, I realised she was really cheeky. So someone's yelling out, "Tell her we don't have electricity," and she says, "Why? Do you think if I tell her she's going to, turn it on?" And that's something that at the time I was like, oh, she's uncomfortable, what do I do about this? But then I got the transcripts and I'm like, yeah, she was on it. So that's in the film, that footage, and it was fairly early footage in the production and it was on an older camera and stuff, but it didn't matter to me. The story is what mattered, and I think she has this cheek and people really liked her in the film because she, as I said, everyone was yelling at her and directing her. So I said to Dunya, my translator, can we go somewhere a little bit more private? And she was like, I'm from this village, they do not see white girls with video cameras here, there is nowhere private. And I was like, I was really conscious this wasn't quite working for her. So I mic'd her up and I said to Dunya, okay, just tell her to give me a tour of this village and talk about whatever she wants to talk about, and we're going to outrun everyone. So we just ran up the hills and outran all the guys with donkeys. So it was only the kids keeping up. So she's showing me around this whole village and I'm like, great, I have no idea what she's saying. But her face was telling me that this was the footage that was going to be useful because, she was enjoying herself. And I got back down hot and sweaty, took some photos and gave them kisses and left. And for me, that was like an awesome day as a director to go, I have to be flexible and spontaneous. And that's what I did. For 5 years of shooting, I had to roll with what was their faces were telling me what was working better. So
that is great. I have like dozens of other questions, but before we run out of time, I think we need to open it up to questions from the audience. This is supposed to be interactive, and that's the interactive section. So if you guys have questions, fire away. Otherwise, I'll keep asking. Yeah.
I'm no filmmaker. I'm a composer. I'm a student composer at CSU, the music school, obviously. So I'm looking for basically some advice on what's the best way to avail directors and producers of my services for people who might be willing to look for an original score as opposed to paying for licenses to use music that's already been created, and hopefully what's the kind of best way for me to network with these people, find out who they are? Where do you guys meet? What's the secret? Bars. I can meet you and hopefully compose some music for you, and hopefully on a film, not too proud, that has a budget, and hopefully, maybe I could get paid. Because that's kind of what we're all hoping to do. Obviously you want to get your name out there and get as much experience as possible, and you're going to be willing to do stuff for free, but the idea is eventually to make some money.
Certainly. I believe Jim has a response.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take that. So you need to suck up to anybody who's got anything to do with movies. And just ask everybody you know until you find somebody who knows somebody, and then suck up to anybody you can find.
Okay.
That's number one.
I could do that.
Number two, when I do low-budget movies, I have certain rules that I tell the directors I work with. And one of the rules is that we're not going to use any pre-recorded music. Because even using one song can cost a very substantial part of our budget. One song that nobody ever heard of. And of course, as you may or may not know, there's two sets of rights. There's the master recording rights and there's the composition rights. And easily you could spend $25,000, $35,000 and then on top of it have an escalator for video sales. And I just won't get into that on a low budget movie. So I say to them, you gotta find some young kid in Cleveland to do all the original music. And they'll come and they'll say, oh, I want a tango, or I want this, and I want something that sounds just like, the latest Lady Gaga piece, and you got to come up with it. Okay. And so, with low budget people, we often go to somebody like you who will be a one-stop shop, ask you not only to compose, but record all the stuff and get all your friends to come and you do the arranging. Now we come to the money part where you want to get paid. That part I can't help you with, except this. The deal that we make is we pay, something, very small amount of money, nominal amount, and hopefully enough to cover your actual out-of-pocket costs. But, as you probably know, if you're registered with BMI or ASCAP, and the film plays on television and plays in the cinema in Europe, in certain countries in Europe, you can get payments through the Performing Rights Society, and I don't have to make those payments. And if the film has some success and is on television in a lot of places, you can make decent money with that, and it doesn't come out of my budget.
I wanted to jump in too, just because you're here at CSU. There's a film department here at CSU. Go and get to know every one of the filmmakers that are here. Watch their films. Contact them. They're here. What you are doing is you are at the beginning of your own generation of filmmakers. You're all in the same. And these are the people who need you and who you need. And specifically, it's exactly what happens at USC, and that's what I talk about too. Thornton School of Music, they provide. There is a composer who's now written 5 short films at USC, all student films, who's just departed agent who's got a major feature. Because those films, if you pick the good filmmakers and there's a strong collaborative relationship with them, those films will get into festivals, those films will begin to have a life, and you'll get taken along, and you'll have a credit. So I think that's good.
I would recommend also building a library. I would build a big, huge, diverse library of music, because these guys that are like me that are cutting movies, we need stuff to cut with. We need stuff to work with and that'll help you develop your style. For example, I cut my movie with Temp, just songs in my personal music library, and I had a song in there by the Arcade Fire that replacing it was it was a dog. It was horrible. It was hard to do. Emotionally, it was hard because I was attached to the song and attached to the vibe, and it was this big, super produced song that cost millions of dollars to make. So when I tried to replace it with my composer, this guy Tilly from a band called Caliphone, he had a really hard time with it because he's an indie guy. And just getting that level of volume was hard for him. So I would build a huge library and make it available to as many filmmakers and TV producers and everyone you can.
And I think Jim sort of touched on this, but master as many styles as you can. Just because you're going to be brought movies that have temp scores stolen from other movies, and and songs and needle drops and all these things, and they're going to say, "We need you to replace all of it." And so you need to sort of get your 808 going and make some beats and all sorts of various different styles. But yeah, that's really useful.
I think also probably it's safe to say a lot of composers don't want to be in a position where they're given a film with a filmmaker who's been using a temp track for however long, saying, make something that sounds like this. So I started working with Nick Huggins, our composer, pretty early on. I went to film school with him, and he was so busy touring, making music, that he took so long to finish film school that when I went back to teach there, he was one of my students, which is kind of funny. But he's a really great guy. He runs an artist-run record label in Australia called Two Bright Lakes, and all the artists on that label I love. I'll always take a break from doing what I'm doing to make a music video for them because I love their music. So Nick has a little studio out in Beachside Coast in Australia, and he works really hard, and he has so little time, but I said to him, he wanted to do it and I wanted him to do it. So even early on when I was cutting a teaser to pitch, I said, I was using this other temp song, and he said, don't play it to me, just send me the footage. And I was in a hotel in Hong Kong, and he sent me music perfectly timed, and I put it on. I'm like, okay, great. And every single time he'd send us a track, he was sending me music while I was still shooting the film and cutting it. So I wasn't in that position where I love music so much, and I was worried the same thing, if I started using tracks that I could never afford, you get stuck with it. So Nick was really a massive part of the process, and we're so happy with the score. And I must admit, I get emails quite often from composers introducing themselves, and so my tip would be, unfortunately, I'm one of those busy people now who can't read emails all the time, and so keep something really short and snappy and send them a really direct link so they can play your music straight away. Because I get this guy who writes every 2 months and says, congratulations on this, or I've been doing this, here's my recent scores, here's some films that I've just been involved with, so I can click on it. But at the moment, I'm all about Nick Huggins, so I'm like, I'm so obsessed with Nick that I can pass it on to other people. So I run a documentary group in Australia, and people ask all the time for music, so I can send those people people on. So the people you're writing to, if they don't need your music, always say to them, feel free, just pass this on to someone else. And like these guys said, start working with your generation of filmmakers and try and get some work experience or internships with composers that you like. Even one day with someone who's doing what you love, you can learn a lot from that. So I'd say try and be around, like-minded people.
And go to the parties. Always go to the parties.
And go to festivals and see shorts. That's the other thing. You see short now.
And the festival parties too, because these are all wonderful advice and you should follow them all. But all the roads well traveled are leading to a wall. Everything that people tried and succeeded at is probably the last time you can succeed that way. And so people's offices are not there to receive you, they are to reject you. So you have to be prepared for that. And that's why you have to go to the places where they don't wear their armor, where they are not expecting you, and impress them personally. And suddenly, if I know you and if you had a good chat and a drink, at the end of the conversation you say, and by the way, would you like to see my demo reel? You have to hear my demo reel. I will be much more likely to actually listen to it.
So lower defenses with alcohol.
Whatever works.
Well, quickly, can I just one more thing quickly?
Sure, absolutely, and then we'll get this
I mentioned trust earlier. Glad you brought this up. My composer gave me the best note I got on my movie, and it's a very important scene. I keep pointing at this like it's going to play. I came in one and he said, and he was very stern and strict, and he said, this scene does not need music. And so have an opinion, watch movies, get creative. But it really helped my movie when he said, I'm not putting music on this.
So, yes.
What do you find to be the biggest challenge with finding a crew when you don't have a movie that's got a lot of big budget to it? I mean, because obviously everybody wants to make money, everybody wants to get paid, but you want to get this film, you got a lot of passion about it, but you don't have a lot of budget.
There are websites, Mandy.com, you can find anyone you want. I mean, makeup, hair, grip, electric, they're out there. Just learn yourself about those. And as I said, there are students in this university making films. Connect to those people. They need you as much as you need them.
But there's always a core group that you kind of like need to sort of get in place. You get a good DP, a good director of photography, maybe a good production designer. Once you have that kind of core group, you'll find that they attract people also. They know people and they can bring people on, people they've worked with and that kind of thing. The hardest thing is you never want to be working with one of those core collaborators who you don't trust and you don't really know. So I'd say start by finding one or two people who are your core creative team, and then everyone else will sort of come together.
Jim, how do you deal with that? Because you're making a lot of stuff in New York.
You need to get a young line producer, production manager, AD type who's working. And if they did 6 movies in the last 6 months, they know a lot of crew people.
There was another question there?
I'm also kind of in his boat. I'm not a filmmaker per se. I actually have a degree in photography, and I'm a stills photographer. So my question to you guys is, when do you start thinking in terms of distribution? Because I'm in that unique spot of, you don't need me to make the film, but I hope you want me to create your EPK so that you can market the film. And I found this interesting situation of some films don't even use on-set photographers. Some films hate on-set photographers. So do you use stills photographers?
Let me take that one. Look, there are good producers and there are bad producers. Okay, any good producer is thinking about promoting his movie from the beginning. If you don't have good still photographs, you're fucked. And don't tell me you're going to take them off your digital master, because it does not work. It never works.
The resolution isn't high enough.
Okay, so any good producer will think ahead without images, you can't have a poster. You can't have your key art. I mean, and you want an example? Look at the poster for the Pier. It sucks because there were no still photographs taken. I told the director, I wasn't on set, I said, you need somebody. He said, oh yeah, I'm going to get somebody. He didn't get anybody. And we suffered from it. So you need somebody. EPKs, I guess, yeah, everybody has behind the scenes footage, EPK, you put stuff on the web and you're doing, so yeah, to the extent you can have that, you should get that as well. In terms of the actual physical making of stills, very tricky. It depends on the director, it depends on the nature of the project, it depends on the camera person. If you're really good and you want to do a good job and you're going to do a lot of this, get a blimp so that you can get in the middle of shooting and not be noisy. I did a film actually in Australia, and we had this woman who came out of fashion photography do the stills, and fashion photography, the still photographer's the star. It's all about them. So she walks onto the set for this movie and she's like, I'm here. And the rest of the crew is like, who are you? And get out of our face. So it's like, you have to have the right attitude. And finding your place in a set as a still photographer is not easy.
No, it's not.
And if you have a good producer, production manager, line producer, AD, they'll help you. Director's not going to be bothered with it. They're busy with other stuff. But the production team should, since they're the ones really responsible for you and hired you, they should help you integrate into the actual shooting so that you're productive and nobody hates you.
Now,
And I just want to say that also, not just that, but distributors sometimes insist on having stuff, and if you haven't had an EPK or high-res enough photos, they'll make you do it later when everything's scattered and you're doing you don't have any opportunity. That may be something even young filmmakers may not know, and so that's another way of integrating yourself.
So then let me ask you this. As the filmmakers, you obviously have a vision for your film. Do you also have a vision for how you want your poster or your stills to come out to where I can help you get what you need? Or is it pretty much that I need to be working with the first AD and the cinematographer and you're going to leave it up to them? And because I know that there's different ways to shoot a film. So if the film is shot one way and the stills turn out another way, you're not going to have a cohesion to be able to actually market the film.
Look,
Does that make sense? Do you think of something like that?
It's like a DP. You ask me who should be the DP, who should be a cinematographer. You look at a reel, you look at prior work, you think that person's good, and then you hire them. And it's a collaborative process. And if you want to be a still photographer, then show me your portfolio. And if you've done good, if you've done good stills on other features, we may have some ideas, and some of our ideas are bad ideas. I mean, one of the big questions for me is studio. Do you take people and put them in a studio so you have a nice, beautiful shot of somebody that you could collage into a poster? I've done it. It's never worked, ever. But I'm not convinced that one day, for the right project, it might be the right thing to do.
Andre, it seemed like you had some thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, these are the publicity shots, and sometimes selling a movie is a different. It has a different goal than making a movie. So very often you will have to work with either the PR person or the producer or the distributor, if there is one, in order to create the publicity shots that actually can get on the poster or get in the press. And I'm speaking against myself, but sometimes the director is not the best person to ask. But it depends on what kind of production you're dealing with. And if the director is really the only person who conducts this operation, then you have to talk to them. But it's a hard job because you really have to get into the heart of the matter and then at the same time not to be obtrusive.
The two most loathed departments on any movie are the ones that some of these are so essential. One is the entire sound department, because you just want to kick them off because how dare they put a boom shadow into your shot, and why are you standing there taking up air and space? And the stills photography, because you're in the way. And on projects that I've directed and not produced, I make my displeasure known. I loathe this person. But I'm used to being loathed,
okay, but I do like
but later, if you haven't got it, you're depressed beyond belief, because in the case of not having an array of stills to be able to use, to have to think about doing ADR on your entire film, which, it's like shoving in the knife and twisting it like crazy. So I think you have to just be prepared for the flack you might get, but also tend to know it. And again, I just think pursue names too. Pursue films you like, or young filmmakers, and find your way in that way.
I'm a writer, and so I write fiction. And I was curious as to what's the best screenwriting software to use, and number two, how do you pitch your scripts to directors and producers?
The best screenwriting software is in your head, really. I mean, the rest of them is like, which hammer should I use? It's really a tool in your hand. So I wouldn't worry about that, but Final Cut or Movie Magic or Microsoft Words are just as good as anything else. How you pitch is, again, who do you pitch is really the question. There are all kinds of pitching methods. There is the elevator pitch, and you have to know exactly what you want. You have to know how to make it fast and efficient. There is the so-called AIDA formula, which they use for commercials: the attention, interest, desire, and availability. First, you have to grab their attention, you have to raise their interest, raise their desire to want to read the story, and then they give them the script. The main thing is you have to have good ideas, and you have to have them ready. In other words, I talk to a lot of scriptwriters who have great ideas, and when I say, okay, well, I'd love to see the script, and say, well, it's I'm working on it. That's not really good, because your pitch is valid only for the amount of time that we are together. If we leave, then you basically have to start over. But you have to be at the right place at the right time, and you have to be ready. That's basically what it is.
I think I would add as well something I've learned over the last few years, which I think is quite valuable information, is learning the art of listening more and talking less. And if you have an opportunity to speak to someone, whether pitching formally or informally, unfortunately, it might sound like a short amount of time, but you have to be able to do that in 30 seconds. So I've been in situations where I've met with a potential buyer at a coffee stand in between at a marketplace, and they've said, hey, going, yeah, good, how are you? What are you working on? And I would say in 30 seconds or less, sometimes less. I speak quite fast when I'm speaking to people who can speak English as a first language. So in 30 seconds, if I don't have their interest, I walk away. Or I learn when to walk away. I see at marketplaces people yabbering on for ages, and they're not making eye contact with who they're talking to, and the buyer is so bored out of their brains. And you have to understand from their point of view, they get this all day, every day. They're not short of people pitching at them. So if I'm talking to Andre and he's looking around and he's like, yeah, and I'm like, okay, I haven't engaged him, I haven't got his attention. Is it because he's bored and tired, or is it, what is it? What's the reason? But always listening. And I had a guy once who, when I did that 30-second pitch, it was probably less than 30 seconds. He said, oh yeah, is it any good? And I said, yeah, it's really good. And I was just being really kind of cavalier about it, because sometimes as a young woman in the industry, you do get spoken to like you're a work experience kid, and maybe I'm not as young as I look sometimes, depending on what I'm wearing or if I'm really hyper. So he said, does anyone who's not related to you think it's good? And I can laugh now, but at the time I was like, I laughed too. I was like, yeah, have you got 3 minutes? So then I showed him my trailer, and then he became more interested. So this is all within under 5 minutes. And then he asked me 20 questions, which I was able to answer like that, because I've been answering them for a long time. And then he said, I might be interested. And then when he got back to where he was from, his head of programming wrote to me saying he's interested, he wants to see a rough cut. I sent it to him. Then he sent me a very long spiel. I was pleasantly surprised. I set it up and in my home theatre system, and I liked this and this and this about it, and he's interested in commissioning it. And that all came from a guy who said to me, does anyone who's not related to you think it's good? And I could be really off-put by that. I could be like, yeah, there's someone I don't know very well, and people who know my mom think it's good, And it was really, sometimes I feel patronised, but I don't have a big enough ego to let those things bother me. And I think that's a really important thing to have. Move on. If someone's not interested, someone else might be. So don't get stuck on, if someone ever rejects you in person or an email, don't dwell too much on it, because if it's not meant to be, you have to find out where it is meant to be. So.
And don't tell anybody why you need them. Tell them why they need you. That's basically just the main human element. If you can give them something that they want at that point, you win. If you tell them why you need them, they have a million people that need the same thing. So it's basically it's a business deal.
And we get told no more than anyone in the world. No is, my brother lost one job once in his entire life. We get told no more in about half an hour. So that's the thing too. Just keep going.
Olivia?
How do you choose the title of the film that won't scare or drive the audience away? Because I'm that type that grew up in very ancient, but now I'm open-minded. So like, beauty is embarrassing. In our culture, would be, not to let the kids see it. So how you choose the title?
Yeah, that's one of Wayne's paintings. He painted that onto one of his lithographs. And there was a Rolodex. His book by Todd Oldham is called Maybe Now I'll Get the Respect I So Richly Deserve. So I had 400 pages of great titles to pick from. And this is one that he uses a lot. And actually, it's the beginning and end of the movie. He does a speech from stage about why beauty is embarrassing in our culture and to be an artist and why he explains it in the movie. So, like I said, I had a whole stack of great titles to pick from.
Anybody else? How do you pick your titles?
A lot of difficulty. I don't know. I haven't had a project where we didn't have enormous fights about the title. And in my last one too, the title is based on. First of all, I think a title has to reflect something in the movie. It doesn't necessarily have to give it away, but it has to have some kind of a connection. It has to have some kind of a drawing value. So my title is at this point, "The Maiden Danced to Death," which is the title of a folk ballad that the dance piece is based on. And my Canadian producer wanted to change it, and actually did change it. The Maiden Danced. And we fought over it for months, because I felt that it doesn't have the dance to death, but that's basically what the essence of the film is. That's basically what makes the title interesting. It makes it longer, but it makes it more interesting, because you say Maiden Danced, yes. What is it? Maiden Dance to Death. In my mind, it's that's interesting. What could it be? But every time we make a movie, the title is the trickiest thing, and we sort of give it a working title, and then we sort of assume that down the line we're going to change it, and we fall in love with the working title, and the distributors come and say, well, in our country, that will turn the audience off, and I have no idea. So it's a very tricky issue.
Sorry, titles to me, there's two kinds. Like I'm 11, you know what that is. You get it right away. It works. It's great. I like a title also that, like mine, that makes you ask a question. It makes you say, "What is that? Why is beauty embarrassing?" Like that resonates to me. If you walk away asking yourself and thinking about that. Like our poster is a picture of this LBJ head he built. He's sitting there. It's a posed picture. People look at it and think, "What is that?" And they really think about it when they walk away, and it stays with them. So I like a title that makes you wonder and question what this movie is. Buyers may not like that.
Is there a question in the back?
Yes, and you tour different film festivals, and your film become very successful. The project that you may have on the shelf that you want to be your dream project, what determines the budget and how you go forward with your next project? If I'm making sense to you.
So yeah, how do you know what to do next, I think, is the, let's say you get some positive attention, how do you know where to go from there?
In the indie world, well, hopefully people start bringing you something in terms of it coming back. But I think in the indie world, it's just finding your next passion. And again, this is a 20-year-old project for me. And I've got ones that are like 14 years old who are now like moving closer to the front of the line. So I think it's probably going to be a 14-year-old one. That's my next thing. But it's passion, interest. And I think every good film is a self-portrait of its director. I just feel that. So I think that that's it. And if you can find better friends and richer friends, then that's where you go.
One of the reasons why I brought that up is because I know the independent film channel, Bravo, HBO, they have like this independent type of movies that they show. And I kind of wonder what would be, decide whether yours goes into a cinema or it goes onto TV.
Actually, Jim, you might be in the best position there, having...
I think you got some wrong assumptions. You know, the first question was like, oh, you're in all these festivals making all this money. That's not the case. They don't pay us. You know, at least they didn't pay me. I don't know about you guys. To have the movie here.
Tell you about
So, you know, so the fact that you're in festivals is nice. It doesn't translate into money. The fact that you're in festivals doesn't translate into a distributor who's willing to invest money to put your film in cinemas across the U.S., which is a very expensive proposition. As far as TV is concerned, you know, the outlets are very limited. The last time I looked, I think Sundance Channel was the only one that was buying these movies. If you're lucky enough to get a sale for one of these smaller movies to a Sundance Channel, you're talking about a sale price of around $10,000 to $15,000 minus expenses, because they throw closed captioning and, you know, insurance and some other stuff on top of that. So, you know, we're not talking about money. We're just talking about showing the movies.
What about the internet?
You mean where everybody can get it for free?
I have two responses to that. Ha ha. I mean, try to get numbers from anybody on the internet. Because if you can, you're a better person than I. To the extent that I've smoked out anything, you're talking about a few thousand sales for a successful movie, of which what comes back to the producer is about 25 cents a unit or something like that. I mean, it's nothing. I mean, theoretically, you could set up your own website, sell these things for $10 to $30 a piece if you want to do everything yourself. And I mean, for example, Hal Hartley, who owns his own catalog, has been spending the last year selling his own movies. But and Hal told me, I think they're selling, but I suspect that he could make more money with his time as a janitor than he's making running this website. You know.
And they're great films.
And they're great movies.
He'd be good at it.
Yeah, I'm assuming that when you start out making your movie or your documentary, that you are intending to make money. But everything I've heard so far is there's no way to make money. How do you?
You know the joke about how to make a small fortune in the movie business?
I know that.
You start with a large fortune.
But certainly some of you must anticipate or hope that you're going to make money somehow on these movies. Or is this simply a labor of love on your part?
Well, if you wanted to make a lot of money, you would be working in Hollywood.
No, that's not true.
or we will be lawyers. I don't know, but
maybe.
I don't know. It's.
No, I was a lawyer. You'd be in the real estate business. Like the rest of my family.
The situation has changed a lot in the last 5-10 years, and in big part it's thanks to the internet that ate our lunch. But I mean, 5-10 years ago, you could actually make a movie, pre-finance it, sell it to European television, and have an art house distribution of sorts, and it looks like it's just basically dying on the vine, which makes it much more difficult to finance movies, because anybody who actually wants a return on their movies will not put return on their money. They won't put money in the movies because there's just no way to see how the revenue is going to come back. We are lucky, and I'm one of those lucky ones. If we get paid for what we do, if we get paid for writing, directing, or acting in our own movies, and that's pretty much at this point in indie films the most we can hope. If anybody tells you otherwise, throw him out.
But I mean, I'm sort of probably one of the most inexperienced people on this panel, and I mean, none of us are broke, right? Like there is, none of us are going to become millionaires, but there is you can make money. I mean, I guess it's more of a question. Like is that not true?
How much did you make on this movie?
Well, good point. But you know, I work on other things. You know,
Well, other things. But how much did you make on this movie?
nothing. I spent money.
So that's not.
But there used to be that model of I invest my grandmother's life insurance and mortgage the house and make my movie, and then from the income of that movie, I'm going to repay my grandmother and make my next movie. And that doesn't work anymore. That's I don't know when it did, but in other words, you may survive on making the movies, but with each movie you have to raise the money again. You can't just make the movie, get the revenue, and produce the next movie from that money.
And then why would anybody invest in your movie if the odds of making any money is practically nil?
Well, there are certain ways to some people are invested in it personally. I mean, if it's some kind of a cause that they are supporting. There are still some organizations that actually support films. There are still some people have relatives who have money. If you do a co-production in Europe or Canada, they have government organizations that actually invest in films because they want their own national film industry to advance. So there is some money out there, but you don't make movies for profit.
We have time for one more question, and from this gentleman back.
What director inspired you or your work for all of you?
That's an interesting question.
What, I'm sorry, again, what director?
He asked what director inspired you, and your work. So, anybody want to take that first?
I always find that tricky. It's like when someone says, "What's your favorite film?" It's like asking a musician what their favorite album is. It's like I find it hard to say one, but I would say in terms of inspiration, growing up, I watched a lot of fiction. I started writing my own short dramas and comedies and whatnot, but over the last few years, I would say in terms of documentary directors that I like, Kim Longinotto, who I think was in the States yesterday for a masterclass in New York. She's a British director. She's made lots of long-form observational style docs, and also another British director, Lucy Walker. They're both documentary directors who I think have inspired me and work really well. And I think, I'm actually more inspired sometimes by music than I am by just picking one film director, because I'm a very visual person, so sometimes I like to remove all visual elements, and I'm really inspired by music. But I find it hard just to pick one director, but I was definitely influenced as a child by watching the 7 Up series, which, did you guys have that here? So obviously I lived in Australia on the other side of the world, but I got to know these characters over time, every 7 years, and so for me I think that series was something that made me realise capturing something over many years, which is what I'll hopefully do with this I'm 11 project, but in a much more universal way. That inspired me, that the longevity of projects, that this film will live a lot longer than I will, and I'm really excited by that. So.
That's a hard question, because I feel like you want to look at your work and see, well, that's where they got that idea, that's where they got that influence. It's not so much an influence, but I tried really hard to make a funny documentary, which is kind of rare. And people are laughing, which is good, and they're laughing when you're supposed to laugh. But I'm a big fan of comedy. I like The Big Lebowski is probably my favorite movie. Not for any particular reason, it just really makes me laugh a lot. So I'm inspired by comedy writers, comedians, just funny TV. So that it's more about comedy for me. So
I can't really tell you, because there are a lot of directors that I admire, and I would never want to make a movie like they do. And there are others that I admire because I really like some stylistic or other elements that they do, but I don't have a particular favorite. I tend to argue with directors, even if they are not there. It's just like, I like this part, but what about that? And so I don't really look for an idol in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of my favorite film directors are not film directors I'm inspired by, because I could never do what they do. It was the most love them so much because they do something that's just so different from what I can imagine. But a film director that was really inspired by making this movie was actually Edgar Wright, who makes these movies that they're not my favorite movies, but they're so full of ideas. It's sort of, I feel like watching those movies is like going to film school, because you literally every scene should be chock full of the ways to move the camera and ways to frame things that I've never have occurred to me to do. So I watched a lot of his movies leading up to making this movie, and I sort of figured if I could have like 1/100th of the ideas he had, that would be pretty good.
That's cool.
Are we going across the line? Or?
Yeah, no, go down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I also love a lot of people's work. And I mean, I started going to the cinema when I was 8 years old, take the bus, Saturday morning, sit in the audience for children's cinema. I mean, there's something for me that is so magical about being in a movie theater and interacting. And therefore, favorites, I mean, I from sort of commercial to the most fringe and indie, $200 movie made. I mean, I'm really happy being in the movie theater, even when it's not so good. So, I don't know, Billy Wilder, I think, as somebody who was sort of influenced me when I was sort of younger. Citizen Kane is one of my favorite movies of all time. It goes all over the place, so yeah.
Jim, do you have
I used to go to this art cinema in Coventry when I was a kid, and I really fell in love with European films. I like them much better than American movies. So Fellini, Charlie Chaplin, Jacques Tati.
Jacques Tati, one of my favorites. Well, we are 5 minutes over our allotted time.
Can I just shamefully pitch my film, which is playing tonight as well?
No, please, shamelessly do it.
Shamelessly. It's called Leave It on the Floor. It's playing at 8 o'clock tonight. I know it conflicts with Genevieve, but she's got a screening tomorrow, so you should go to her first hour and then come to mine and finish it tomorrow.
Okay, what pay?
But it's a musical. It's a tremendous amount of fun. We've won Best Feature in a bunch of festivals. We're having a nice life with it. It's a good time. So, and I call the film it's a party film with a few things on its mind. And it treats a lot of things seriously too, in an entertaining way. So.
Mine is at 3:25 and 3:15 today, this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon.
Yes.
Same theater.
And see these guys' films this afternoon tonight, and then come and see I'm 11 tomorrow at 1. And maybe invite someone you knew when you were 11, if they're here in Cleveland. And visit iam11.com and invite some 11-year-olds.
If you were ever 11, go see your movie.
Yeah. It's my demographic.
Yes, definitely.
For anyone who's ever been alive.
Thank you guys so much.